Well, welcome behind the DM screen with WorldSmith. This is our first take at a little podcast here. Unlike all the other D&D podcasts that are interested in having fun and telling stories, this is strictly boring content. We just are here to talk about the nuts and bolts of DMing. So what goes on behind the DM screen, the highs, the lows, the train wrecks, the machinations.
We're experts in the train wrecks.
Yeah, experts. Yeah, well, we have a lot of that to share. My name is Ian. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a game designer. Wizard is my go-to class. I'm also the head of creative at WorldSmith. You guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'm Cameron. I'm also a filmmaker. I run the socials for WorldSmith. I'm an amateur magician, and I love to play D&D.
What's your go-to class?
Oh, Druid, absolutely.
Oh, Druid. I actually didn't know that.
Druids.
That's fun.
Yeah.
I'm Matt. I'm the CEO at WorldSmith. I am a boring business guy, so
Not boring at all.
quite
Not
as cool
boring
as
at all.
the film guys over here, but I like to pretend. And then big fantasy nerd, big D&D player my whole life. And then my go-to class is definitely the Arcane Trickster.
Oh,
First class, never left, man.
Arcane
Yeah.
Trickster.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's solid. That's how you win games at D&D.
It is, yeah.
All right. Well, before today we're going to be talking about how to start a D&D campaign. So, what makes a good session one? What makes a bad session one? Before we dive in, though, we are going to answer a question from our Discord. WorldSmith has a Discord with over 1,000 DMs and it's growing every day. So we have a little randomized chart here with a D8. We have 8 questions, and we're going to ask one of these. So after I generate the question, we're going to have each of us roll on the D20 to roll for initiative. That will determine the order that we answer the question in. You have 1 minute to answer the question and your reasoning why. Okay?
I love that.
Sweet.
So we're going to do initiative first, I think, so you have less time to think about the question. So
Cameron,
go ahead.
jumps higher for
I got
dex
a 9.
modifier.
9, fine. No dex modifiers. We all have a dex modifier. A 19!
That's coming, bro.
All right, here we go. 16. Okay,
nice.
so we'll just go right down the line.
Cool.
So, all right, and here is our question. A 2. The question is, what are the situations that the D&D rule set does the worst with?
You know, so
Go.
I've mostly been playing 5e my whole life, so
Yep.
a lot of my answers will probably come from there. But honestly, I think one of my biggest issues has always been the way that they ran weapons. And I think this is probably something that's fresh on my mind because of the new rule set.
Those are the new rules to
2024.
weapons, yep.
But I didn't even realize how much of a frustration that was for me, like being able to like really focus on a set of weapons or something. And I don't think the new rule set did it perfectly, because now I think everybody's just going to be locked into like one weapon. or
Right,
two.
so you're saying like the fact that the weapons are really not different hardly in any way.
Yeah, or just like you get proficiency bonuses and then you never really have any additional bonuses as you
Right.
continue to play with
Right.
that one weapon over and over. I actually thought that was a really, really cool idea. But again, pros and cons with the new system and how they do that.
I'm curious. Yeah, I don't think the new system made it. I think maybe the intention of the new system was like, there's a reason to have a couple different weapons with you, but I think ultimately you still will just find the weapon that has the effect you're happiest with, and then just use that for every attack.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it would be nice if players could have a better way to like, okay, I'm going to learn how to use this, or like get some additional benefits for using something for a long time and just learn along the way. So
yeah, like I always feel really bad when a player is like, especially like rogues. I mean, I don't feel that bad for rogues, but but when a player is like, oh, I want to have this guy who like fights with knives, and I'm like, that's a very cool concept, but just like every time you deal damage, it's just gonna be worse. Like you should just use a longsword, because like it's just gonna be better. You know what I mean? But then it's like that's you want your character concept to be able to be cool and stuff.
Exactly.
So.
That would be cool if you could like level up with a certain weapon proficiency and like unlock new abilities based on what weapon you use the most. I found playing as monsters, my players are just like, by the way, you have disadvantage now because I stuck you with a dagger.
Yeah.
And like that's all that they get because they're using a dagger and they're proficient with it.
Yeah, totally. Good answer.
Got to add skill
Good
trees
answer.
to D&D.
Yeah, exactly. Wizards of the Coast, we hope you're listening. Okay. I think mine would be the thing D&D the rules do the worst with. I think mine would be I've never been happy with how negotiation quite works in D&D, because I think you get like a character with really strong charisma, Negotiation, I think, works fine when it goes bad. Like when you have a character with like bad charisma and they're like, oh, I rolled a 5. And you're like, okay, well, clearly they don't believe you or something. But I think it's really tough when you get into a situation that you're like trying to convince someone to do something and you're like, well, make a persuasion roll. And then they roll like a 14 or something. And you're like, okay, they're like kind of persuaded. And then the player's like, well, I want to convince them more.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, so do I just let you roll? Do I just let you keep rolling persuasion until you like get a high enough roll that you've done this, or you fail? Like, I just don't think there's a. It's almost like I don't know what the solution is. It's like because in combat there's a sense of like, oh, we can like weather them down, or we can impose conditions on them or something. Right. And you get in a negotiation situation, and it's basically just like. Either the DM rules that it all comes down to a single roll, which that is not a perfect system.
It's not.
Or the DM rules that they just kind of allow you to make as many kind of persuasion or deceit rolls as you want.
Or everybody at the table gets to plug in.
Yeah, exactly. And then at some point, like the law of averages is just like at some point somebody's going to like roll a good thing. And then you're like, I guess you convinced the guard to let you in. Yeah, I just think there could be something there, but ultimately, I don't know. It's not quite what D&D is about, but maybe I feel this way because I play a lot of bards, and so I'm often like, often have very high charisma, and then I'm just like, okay, whenever I roll a persuasion, I just get a 25, and then people just do whatever I ask them to do. Which is kind of fun, but ultimately is a little bit like, this feels maybe like a little cheap. Yeah, I don't know.
That's fair.
Okay, that's
my answer.
Honestly.
Yeah, I was stuck between two. The first one was shops, like the way you can open a business and try to make money. I always found it very difficult because you don't want to reward your players too much, but you also want to make it worthwhile, and it takes a lot of time and investment. But I think the one I'm going to stick with is illusion spells. I had a player who loved using illusion spells, but it made almost every combat obsolete because they were so smart about it. And it was just like, okay, I guess the villains, the NPCs, the bad guys, they're going to have to roll some kind of perception check or an insight check.
Right.
And if they fail, like, they genuinely believe there's a dragon there. And now they have to go call the town's guard, and all this stuff happens. And there's just a lot of impact that illusion spells can have, which is cool, but it's kind of a double-sided blade.
It's true.
Yeah, that's tricky. I've actually never played like a strong illusion character. That would be... Yeah, I can see how that would simultaneously be like, oh, this will be fun, but then also like, wow, this is like so much extra work for me as a DM.
You have a whole party of players who are also like, I want to fight, but you know, we just can't because it's messing it up.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Well, there you go.
As an arcane trickster, man,
I was about to say
love that stuff.
I know.
I'm like,
but at least with arcane trickster, like I feel like
it's not too overpowered.
Well, and I feel like a lot of times the rogue is like, oh, I'll like distract them so I can get sneak attacks or whatever.
Exactly.
Whereas like an illusion mage like truly does not want people to fight them. Yeah. So like it makes total sense for them to just like avoid all combat at all costs. Yeah.
That's It's one way playing. It's fun.
Yeah. I don't think. Yeah.
Depends. Yeah.
Not fun for the other. The whole party has to be on board. I see what you're saying there. Yeah. I see what you're saying there.
Yeah. There's a time and a place.
Okay. Well, that was our answer to that question. Thank you, Discord community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, on to the quest at hand. Starting a D&D campaign. If you are a new DM or even if you're an experienced DM, at some point you are going to have to ask yourself the question, what does your session 1 look like and how do you start your game? I figured we would start from the bottom. All three of us have been players before in other people's games. So my first question is, have you ever been in the first session of a campaign, you get invited to come play with some friends, you sit down for its first session, as the first session is panning out, or when you leave, you're like, that was terrible. And now I'm like, how do I back out of this campaign? What's the worst opening session that you've ever had in a game?
Is this as a dungeon master or as a player?
It could be both. If you feel like you have done that as a DM, then I'm curious. You're more than welcome to share. But you could also just be with you as a player.
Well, as a dungeon master, I did have a game where...
I love you just going hard in. Like, I messed this up really bad.
No, this wasn't necessarily on me. Maybe I didn't know how to handle it, but I had a player who loved to steal things a bit too much. Okay. Every possible encounter, they were looking to steal something, and it was over the top beyond the funny, like, rogue, I want to take this, I want to steal that. Like, they were rolling multiple sleight of hand checks to steal every single encounter, every single moment. Yeah. And it just became over the top, and I was like, I don't know if this game's going to work. Yeah. But, I mean, as a player, I don't know that I've really had that happen to me.
That's cool.
Yeah, I feel like most of my dungeon masters have been pretty fun to play with.
That's great. Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, what about you guys?
And this is a tough one because it depends a lot on the players and the expectations set by the dungeon master. But there have been a couple campaigns where I start and just every single player is really wrapped up in their own character and like what they want to do and stuff like, and like that's great. You know, you want every player to have their own unique twist on things, but when everybody's like so unique and nobody's united or focused on the quest at hand and they're just like all really oriented on what their character wants to do, it makes it really tough to run a session because you're like, okay, like there's a campaign here, guys. Like I need everybody to be focused on something, right? And everybody just wants to do what their character wants to do. And it often conflicts and people want to split up and it just leads to messiness. So.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I had like the three of us actually were asked to go DM at a super cool event for Utah Tech Week, and it was really fun. We got to play with like a bunch of first-time players, and it was awesome. The event was a huge success. But I was playing with a bunch of people who I was DMing, and it was 80% of the people at the table had never played D&D before, right?
Yeah.
And the way that it was kind of a West March campaign, so the way like we always started in like the town, you know what I mean? And it was really fascinating to see like that first 30 minutes of the sit down, and it was just a one shot, but the first 30 minutes, everyone is so excited about what their character's like shtick is that they're like, I have to do that. Like I have to do the shtick, right? And so then you end up with like 6 players in a town, and one person's like, I have to go get drunk, and like another player is like, I have to go like find this one item I care about. Another player's like, I'm really into maps, so I go to the map store, and like immediately you just have like a split party situation, like right out the gate. And then as like a DM, you kind of want to like push him out the door, but then you also don't want to be too pushy. You know, you don't want to be like, okay, like you guys are like gonna go do the thing, right? You know what I mean? So.
Because then it takes the collaborative out of collaborative storytelling. Yeah. You know, it's just like, okay, I'm just pushing everyone to do my story, and that's never fun. So
yeah, because I've also experienced kind of the opposite side. This was actually not a D&D game, but I was playing a game of Lancer, and it was a little like in Lancer, well, D&D has these similarities too. It's a very combat-focused game, right? So you build out a character that's all just about, you know, dealing a lot of damage, right? Yeah. And then we kind of got into this campaign, and it took us like 3 sessions to just get into a combat. Like there was like so much, like we would like show up at this place, and then there would be like these scientists, you know, and they would like surrender, and they'd be like, we like don't want to fight, and like the part of me that like is just into a good story is like this makes sense. Like I don't want to like murder innocent people, but also I was like, I just spent like a month like reading a whole rule book and like building a bunch of things to like make this, and like I have like a giant plasma cannon, you know what I mean? And I'm like,
you want to use the
plasma I want to use the plasma cannon. And so it was almost this opposite thing where it was like, it kind of swung the other way where, you know, the GM had kind of like built a campaign around like a very specific idea that they had that I think really wasn't aligned with exactly what the players wanted to do. And it was a little bit like, so like, when are we going to get to fight something? Because like, that's why we're all playing Lancer, so we can like blow stuff up. Yeah. And I think D&D is kind of similar at the end of the day. It's like when you build your character, 90% of your abilities are combat abilities. So it's like at a certain point, the players are just going to be like, I've got these, like, I got this fireball spell. I would like to use it at some point.
I did think of one.
Good.
Session 1, my DM, we had 2 people, me and a friend playing. And session 1, my DM dropped my intelligence by 6 points.
Oh my gosh.
We met a wandering stranger who like granted us like a gift, and he rolled on a random table.
Oh no.
I got -6 intelligence, and my friend got like...
What class were you playing?
I think it was a fighter.
Okay, but still.
Not horrible.
But still.
I know. And then my friend got like a bunch of XP or something. And I was like, okay, this is a really fun start to the game. I don't want to play this anymore. Oh, man. I don't know what questions you got for us, but it comes down to setting expectations. I think that fixes everything.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question was like, you know, with that in mind, you know, we've all run plenty of campaigns. So yeah, I'm curious when you sit down to plan your session 1, like what kind of things are you thinking of? And what types of things are you trying to like figure out how to kind of set expectations or make sure that the first session goes well?
Yeah, I think the biggest, most simple one is role play and combat balance, right? Yeah. Like some players just really are into the role play, and some players really are not. And I've played games where half the party is like acting it all out. They love talking through encounters, and you can tell that one player at the corner of the table is just like, I don't want to be here. I want to be like stabbing stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So I think that's a huge thing to set up before you start playing.
Yeah, that balance. Yeah, that's really
even
key.
at a really basic level. That's super important.
Yeah, totally.
Honestly, for a session 1, it's It's tough because, I mean, obviously there's a lot of session 0 stuff that goes into this. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But for session 1, I feel like, going back to my comment from earlier about what went horribly wrong, you have to find a way to get everybody united.
Totally.
And so, I mean, whether that means you give people background for why they're arriving at this place so they know why they know each other, that it's not just like some random, all right, so how do you guys know each other, right? It's like the worst thing you can do as a dungeon master, just make them make it up on the spot, right? So making sure they have some context and then give them a reason to continue forward. That's actually pretty concrete. So they're not just making it up or trying to figure it out or just following whatever tiny piece of information you give them.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, I kind of have, and I don't run every session, I don't run every campaign this way, but I kind of have, generally like my default with session 1s is to, right off the bat, put the players in a situation where it's essentially like a life or death situation, as opposed to kind of like a high like morals question or like a long-term goals. Like probably the most successful session 1 that I ran, I think, was like all the players wake up and they're in a dungeon. And they don't have like their core weapons with them, and they can't remember like the last 3 weeks of what happened to them.
That's literally my favorite one for myself too. I ran an amnesia campaign.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
And it was like a 4 or 5 shot. But it was so good, like having everybody just not know anything about who they were, what their skills were, just like having them figure that out. Everybody was very united from the very beginning.
Because I think what's great about that is like immediately the question becomes, how do we get out of this dungeon, right? And everyone can agree on that. So like there's no kind of moment where you have to be like, well, what I would like to do is be like stealing things all the time, and what I would like to do is like, you know, go and assassinate the king or something. It's like, you just want to get out of the dungeon. And then that'll take you a session or maybe 2 sessions to kind of get out of that initial challenge. And then at that point, the party has played enough together. They're kind of starting to get a sense for each other. Then you can, I think, then it's easier to introduce an NPC that's like, oh, here's the big problem that's going on in the world or something, and they can kind of make some decisions about it. But I think it's just a great way to like get the game. You know, I'm a player in a game right now that like started with like a shipwreck, for example. You know what I mean? It's just like, listen, like, we all wash up on the beach kind of situation. We like there's goblins like right there that are about to attack us. Like, it's, you know, like I think those types of challenges right off the bat, it's like everybody gets to use those special skills that they got prepped. They get to kind of figure out what the other people at the table are about before you have to kind of have those like debates as a party about like which direction should we go and like what should be important to us and stuff. So I do like that a lot as a concept.
It sounds like it's essentially on session 1, you want to put everyone into the same circumstance, right?
Sure.
Everyone needs money. Everyone wants to survive. Try to find a way to make everyone almost force collaboration. Right? That sounds, totally. I did have a game once where I had a player, and I was new to D&D. He was at a bar drinking, and he just refused to leave the bar.
Right, totally.
And I couldn't hook him because his character didn't care about the circumstances.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he just didn't leave the bar that session.
Right.
Yeah. It's a little ironic because I think, and again, like there's so many ways to skin a cat, but it's like, I think that like the classic setup for like a D&D campaign is like everybody meets at a tavern, right? And some person comes in and tells them a thing. And that's very classic D&D. Like if everyone knows that that's kind of what the shtick is and we're all adventurers, that's a great way to start a campaign. But I think in this day and age, like with kind of a lot of like 5e players, people are really focused on role play. People are really focused on character motivation. And so that you have players who, like you said, will never do something if it doesn't feel aligned with their character motivations. So I think like in you know earlier editions of D&D, people went in being like, well, I know I'm a hero and I know that my goal is to like save the town. And that was kind of always built into the structure of the game. But I think like now in 5th edition, I do think that type of like quest can be a little harder to kind of pitch a player on, of just like, here's a halfling that comes into the bar and needs help, because then you're going to have somebody who'd be like, well, halflings killed my parents, so I don't care about halflings. And suddenly you're just like, like this is not what I want to be dealing with.
It almost
like,
requires
right
more studying from the DMs. Like you have to know everybody's backstory and what their motivations are to really be able to hook people in such a loose format like that.
Right.
Whereas if you just pick a life or death or an everybody wants the same thing in this scenario kind of situation, then it just becomes so much easier.
I am curious though to talk about, because you mentioned like session 0, which like some like newer DMs or players might not be familiar with that concept. So talk a little bit about like what you do, even kind of like the types of interactions you have with the players in your group before you even sit down at the table for the first time.
Yeah, I would say session 0 is just an expectations meeting. It's not necessarily like you're playing the game with your players. I think it's more you sit down with them as a DM. I actually often do this just one-on-one with people beforehand. I'll just like call everybody for 10, 15 minutes and be like, hey, like, who's your character? Tell me about what they want. Like, just talking to them about that. And then when we actually meet up for session 1, I'll often just like lay out a few things like, okay, here's my like almost like establishing rules, like here's how I like not metagaming, or here's how I want you to act in role play, or here's how I like want you to do this. And like it's a conversation. I'm not just like here's the law of the land, right? But it's like, you know, once everybody has an expectation about what's going on and they know more or less that they're going to be like thought of in the campaign and how the story goes forward, it becomes a lot easier.
Totally. I like that a lot.
I think integrating backstories is great for session 0 too. I've had a lot of games where as a player, me and someone else are brothers or best friends going into it, and so immediately you have someone you can role play off of, and you have someone you have that connection with. And then as a dungeon master, it also provides fuel for that kind of that hook, right? Session 1, all of a sudden a bounty hunter ambushes your party, and guess what? They're hunting down the specific person in your party, and now that player specifically is hooked because they have some kind of personal investment. And obviously the other players, their lives are at stake, so they have to help out. And now they're pissed off at this guy for putting their lives in danger.
Totally.
It creates conflict, and conflict is fun.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, one of my kind of controversial like DM takes is probably the campaign I'm currently running that I've been running for a couple of years that I've really enjoyed. Like, I basically just picked one of the characters. I had the players do backstories, so I basically was like, hey, if you can send me in a backstory, it could even just be 100 words, just a couple sentences, but I'll give you like an extra 50 XP just when you start the campaign. And so pretty much everybody sent me a backstory, and everyone's backstories were interesting, and I found little ways to pay them off. But essentially one of the characters had like what to me sounded like a really interesting kind of like big bad villain. And so I was just like, I'm just going to make this guy the big bad villain, right? Yeah. And in some ways it kind of made that character almost like the protagonist of the group a little bit. Like this guy was the real one who had like the bone to pick with like the guy, and then everybody else was like, that guy does seem bad, we should go after him. You know what I mean? And it actually, I think, really helped. I don't know, like, again, like that's kind of like my hot take as a DM, but like I almost kind of like, at least for each chapter of your campaign, like just like pick a protagonist, like just be like, this story at the end of the day is mostly about this one person, and it's like their bone to pick a little bit. And then like as long as it sounds fun and sounds enjoyable and like it benefit, you know, is like a quest that seems like a good quest, like the party will go along with it. And I think a lot of times that can help kind of like unify, like, you know, especially if you have cool, like chill players who are like, who just want the table to like run well, and you can kind of set up those expectations of people just being like, yeah, I can get behind this. Like, let's go. Like, this person slighted your family and did you like a misfortune. We're all going to get behind you and go help you out. And then when that chapter resolves, then you can introduce like a different thing from another person's backstory. You know what I mean? And then it's like, I find that can be really compelling to kind of have like a little bit of like a main character or like kind of like a main thrust that you're kind of focusing on. And generally, I think most players will then be able to kind of band around that.
Yeah, a really easy way to integrate that too in your session 0 is give your players like each 3 or 4 things that only they know about something. That way it's not your NPCs doing the exposition, but you let your party like tell each other, you know, hey, I've been here before, I used to live here, and I know that there are trolls crawling all over this forest, but I also know that their secret weakness is fire or something along those lines, right? And that gives your players just even more to share with each other, and I think that's cool.
I love that. I love that idea.
Yeah, I think it has 2 really strong benefits too, because not only are you like given a really easy way to move on and like add more to the story like that, but it also motivates the stories to be super invested in their own backstories, right? If you set that expectation, all right, everybody's gonna have their time to shine, kind of like in the session 0, then everybody's gonna care a lot about what their backstory is, and they're not gonna just like put in a half effort or anything like that. It's gonna be really good, and then you get to have all these people who really care about the story, and then when it's their turn, they're gonna be really invested, and they're gonna be excited for their time, so they care about like what's happening for the other players at the table too.
Yeah. One of the last things I'll say too is like the cool thing about D&D, all role-playing games, is like ultimately you can just make it whatever you and the party want. You know what I mean? So it's like I played one, like I have a really enjoyable campaign that that started with a friend, and he's really into old school D&D. So we were playing a D&D, but even if we had been playing 5th edition, basically he just from the beginning, he was just like, listen, this is the way the game works. He's like, every session you guys just are going to go pick like a challenge in the surrounding area that you're going to go solve. That challenge is only going to take 1 session. When you're done, like, you know, like that will be completed. You'll get a certain amount of experience points, and then at the end of the session, we vote on which one you want to do next, so that I know what to prep for the next session.
It's a great way to do it.
And it was just like super straightforward, and it also meant that like, you know, it was everyone playing was pretty busy, so it's like there were certain weeks that one person couldn't be there, and so it made it kind of flexible for that. But yeah, like it was very formulaic, but it was still super fun, right? Like it wasn't this huge, like there were ways that some of the events were tied together, but it really was just like, what should we explore next week? And we'd all chat about it, and we'd be like, well, there was that one guy who said there was like, you know, a hidden thing behind the waterfall that like the wood elves were talking about, and we're like, that's what we'll do. And then the DM was like, perfect, that's what I'll prep for next week.
Love it,
and so it was just this very like easy exchange between kind of GM and players of just being like, we'll tell you what we want to do next week. That's what you'll prep. You know, like we know that you've prepped that, and we know that's the only thing you've prepped, so that's what we're playing. And when we're done with that, we'll tell you what we want you to prep next. You know, and it's like that's the great thing about it is at the end of the day, you have that session 0. You talk with your players about like, this is the game I'm interested in running. Does that sound fun? If everyone can agree on it, you know, it can really be whatever you want at the end of the day, as long as everyone's on board.
Yeah, and everyone's gonna be happy.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and just in case you were ever like worried about prepping your session 0 or session 1. I don't know about you guys, but every single time I play D&D with a new DM, the game almost feels like a different game. You know, you're playing with different rules, different difficulties, and essentially the game is what you make it, right? And setting expectations can make the game. So
yeah, that's great. Okay, well, we're gonna wrap up. We're gonna try a thing. We'll see if people like this, but we're calling it the Puzzler. So this is a situation that has stumped a DM, and then we're looking for the internet to provide us with how you would play this situation. I'll provide the first puzzler. In further weeks that we may source them from our Discord or from other people at the table. So here is my puzzler. So this came from my most recent campaign. I have a very powerful wizard player. He's fighting inside a burning house. There is a very strong fighter, like who, you know, lots of like full plate mail. They can dish out like 45 points of damage in like a swing. The wizard kind of messes up. His polymorph goes away because his concentration thing fails. He only has like 6 hit points left.
Shoot.
The knight combatant grapples him and like puts a sword to his throat. Which I'm like, this is cool because the knight combatant doesn't really want to kill them. He just like wants to escape with his life because the house is like burning down around him. So I was like, oh, he'll like put a sword to his throat and then be like, you have to let me go. As soon as I put his sword to his throat, though, I was like, oh, this is actually terrible, because within 30 feet of him is another player who has cure wounds, right? So I started to realize we're in an initiative order situation. So the wizard has already taken his action. The knight took his action to like put the sword to his throat, right? He's basically held an action so that if any other player moves, he'll like stab him and deal him, like kill him essentially.
Yeah.
Well, he won't kill him. He'll start having to take death saves. But then it goes to the next player's action, who can move, right, 15 feet, touch him, cast cure wounds. Initiative order comes back around. The wizard can just take his action.
Yeah.
Do whatever he wants. Teleport, do damage, put polymorph back on. Yeah. And I just like realized in that moment, there's no way to do this well without bending the rules. So my puzzler is, how would you play this with your players at the table that you think would be a satisfying way? Because it's also a life or death situation. That was the thing I also ran into, is players do start caring about you bending the rules if you're going to kill their player. Kill their character, right? Like they want you to play the rules. They want to be like, well, I have spell slots, I can do this, if their character is going to die. Mm-hmm. I won't tell you how it panned out at our table. I was a little unprepared for it. Yeah. But leave a comment if you have a concept of how you would solve this problem at the table, or if the solution is just that this is something that you should never have a villain do in D&D. I don't know. So leave your comments. Let us know if you have a solution to the puzzler, and then we'll respond to your comments in the next episode of the podcast.